Welcome to the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the Pearl of the Orient. Shanghai is the city of the future. All systems go, full steam ahead. It never stops. Technology, innovation, ambition. It's everywhere. Join us as we explore this new world and talk to the people making it happen. The Tech in Shanghai podcast. The future is now.
We are back. This is the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the podcast bringing you the people and experiences on the ground in Shanghai. I am your host, John Vallis, and I'm a little nervous today. We've got a legitimate celebrity in the house joining us today for a discussion. Jenny Zhu. She is the voice of ChinesePod. If any of you guys out there have ever engaged in that great language learning resource, you'll know Jenny's voice very, very well. And she's also the co-founder of OpenLanguage, a fairly new language learning resource, which I'm sure we'll get into in the show, covering not only Chinese, but a number of different languages. And it's a very, very exciting initiative, and I'll get Jenny to tell us all about it throughout the course of the show. But Jenny, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. I know you're very, very busy, so thanks for coming on the show.
Well, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
So Jenny, you've been doing this for how many years now with ChinesePod?
9 years now.
Wow, it's so long.
Yes.
So many things must have changed in Shanghai over 9 years. I mean, I can't even imagine. I came here the first time in 2009, but 9 years. And you're from Shanghai originally, right?
Yes, I'm from Shanghai, but I went to high school in Singapore and later university in Australia. So I had studied overseas for a total of around 9 years. And after graduating from college in Australia, I came back to Shanghai and started to find work. And ChinesePod was my first job and has pretty much been sort of the only main job I've had up to this point.
That's awesome. Not many people hit the nail right on the head with the first job coming out of university. You know, a lot of times you have to find your feet and you go from job to job. You don't really like it, but you came right out of school, you found what you liked, and you've obviously done an incredible job at doing it.
Thank you very much. And I feel really lucky, extremely lucky in that regard, because I studied international relations in university, and it wasn't something, it wasn't something that had a very clear job prospect for.
Right.
Besides, I guess, working embassies or consulates. So after coming back to Shanghai, I went through a period of time of just trying to figure out what I wanted to do and what skills I had. And I had actually done a course in simultaneous interpretation, and I was working as a freelance translator interpreter in Shanghai. I've always loved learning English, and also I was rubbish at math.
you and me both.
I'm not alone here. So I wanted to do something that just utilized my language skills and would allow me to share my experience. So funny, in a very funny way, I didn't do it through teaching English to Chinese. The chance presented itself as teaching Chinese to foreigners, which, I think all things have a funny way of working out eventually. And, I still remember I went for the job interview and the address of the office said, in the Xintiandi area. And I thought, wow, this is like so high end, so plush. But then as I actually went to the place, it's in a little back alley.
one of those yet to be developed areas of Xintiandi.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now we'll call that, a converted like a 七九八 red town in Shanghai. But back then it was really a factory. It wasn't even converted. The factory, I guess, just ran out of money and they decided to rent out space.
And for those listening, Xintiandi now is like a very trendy restaurants and high-end shops area of Shanghai, right? But
yes.
Even 9 years ago so some of it was still kind of like that, or was just beginning?
9 years ago, it had started, the area was already posh, but 5 minutes away from the posh stuff.
It was the complete opposite.
Yeah. Still, old lane houses and textile factories,
Right.
which was where the first Chinese pod office was at.
It's one of those amazing things about Shanghai, the city, is the juxtaposition of two totally different things right next to each other. I mean, you can still see it, although less often now, but you'll see an amazing high-rise or an amazing mall or amazing whatever, brand new, sparkling, and literally attached to it, right next to it, the other side of the brick wall is, something that could have been there 20 years ago, like
Yes.
a pile of bricks and maybe it's a dumpling shop or who knows,
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the city kind of still really, it has a lot of character because it's not just all, all luxury, all brand new. It still has that like kind of contrast,
And I grew up here, so, that kind of juxtaposition represents what Shanghai is to me.
Right.
It's developing so fast. It's so fast-paced and full of opportunities, yet it still has these nuggets of it feels like home to me,
Sure.
Yeah.
There's so many things I want to discuss with you, Jenny, but I just have to say first, it's such an odd thing to have you in my ear now as a guest on the show because I've had your voice in my ear so many times using ChinesePod in the past. And I mean, when I opened the show, I said that I'm with a legitimate celebrity, and that's true, right? I mean, how many? I think it's something like 300,000 followers on ChinesePod that you've had. Is that correct?
So over the years, if we count by registered users, it's almost 1 million.
Wow.
Over the past 10 years.
What do you like? How does that make you feel? You've been in 1 million people's ears.
It makes me feel that there's nothing I would rather do in the world than going to studio every week and be able to help people learn Chinese. And over the years, I've had the chance to meet a lot of our users who either virtually online when they comment on lessons or reach out to me, or we actually get a fair number of visitors every year, people who come to Shanghai for work on business trip or just on personal trips, who make the extra effort of coming to our office and say hi to us. And just last week, a user from Boston stopped by, and I guess I've here and there leaked information. I have a son who really loves cars and trains, so she bought a little like a Boston Railway little toy
like
train,
an old railway car sort of thing. Yeah.
And she said, "Well, I thought your son would enjoy this."
That's amazing.
And it just makes me feel, it's such an honor and privilege to be welcomed into people's lives like this.
It must be so rewarding, especially for those, again, like you said, that do come to you or let you know online that you've really helped them develop their language skills, and as a result, they got the job or they got the girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Because I think learning languages it's not easy, but if you are persistent enough and sometimes lucky enough to have found different resources and different methods that help you, it could be such a rewarding and empowering experience.
Sure.
Looking at my own life, for example, and many others' lives, learning language just gives you so many professional as well as personal opportunities. Just like you said, it might be a new job, or very often it's you married someone, right? And then have wonderful kids. And it's just it's a very transformative experience.
It is. It's an amazing thing. I was living in Japan when I was a teenager for a year of high school. And I remember going to the language center where foreigners would go to learn languages. And I remember this very memorable moment where I met this Egyptian lady, and we were both kind of intermediate in our Japanese, which, don't test me, it's since gone way down. But she couldn't speak any English, and of course I couldn't speak any Egyptian, but we were able to communicate at a basic level, but a conversational level in Japanese, which was both a foreign language for us. And it's cool. It's like one of those weird experiences where, I don't know, you're able to share something with someone because of this medium of language that neither of you are that familiar with, and you're both kind of a little uneasy with it, but you're still able to connect in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a interesting phenomenon, and obviously you've facilitated that so many times. I mean, have you ever thought about being in a million people's heads? I mean, can you? How do you wrap your head around that?
Well, for me, it's just, I think after I've realized how much I enjoy doing what I do, I said, I want to be just creating content, engaging content that tells people not only about the language they're learning, but also helps them to understand that culture, that society. Because I think China is still, many people see it as a distant monolith, right? It went from being behind the Iron Curtain to, just a place that maybe everyone seems the same with an authoritarian government, or it conjures up images of censorship. There's a lot of challenges about China, but at the same time, there's so much glory, liveliness, and just real human life struggles and stories about China.
Sure. I mean, it's an amazingly rich culture now, and of course has an amazingly rich history.
Yeah, and I think the format of ChinesePod, I've always seen it more as a content business rather than just an educational resource.
Right.
We publish a new lesson every day, and I often get asked, do you need so many, now we have around 3,000 lessons. Do you need so many lessons to learn Chinese? And people ask us, do you run out of lesson ideas? But you don't really run out of ideas because language is evolving, right?
Right.
It evolves with the changes in our lives. So, if you look at what we're doing at ChinesePod lately for lessons, we're talking about the World Cup, we're talking about Alibaba filing for IPO, and I just feel it's so cool to be able to share these aspects of China to an audience who's interested in it.
Totally. And as you know, probably better than anybody, a huge part of learning a language is also understanding the culture to some degree. Again, to go back to the Japanese example, I remember when I first arrived, I was so frustrated at many of the different quirkiness, little quirky things about the people there. And I got really frustrated about it. Only when I started learning the language could I view those things in a different way, So you get a pretty strong cultural understanding that comes with the language. And I think that's been part of the way that you educate is you're putting it in that cultural context. And like you said, if people ask, don't you think there's enough lessons now or whatever? No, because the culture and what's happening here in China is, like you said, constantly evolving. And as part of a program of education and of content, it has to constantly be updated to reflect those changes, right? And that evolution.
And I feel like if you look at language learning in general, not just, Chinese instruction, language learning has always been kind of disembodied from real life. You study content in a very prescribed way, right? It's the first, it follows a certain sequence and scope, but that's not how real language learning or how real language is used in real life. In real life, it's a lot more. It depends a lot more on your personal situation. It's a lot more serendipitous. It's a lot more. It just needs to have different pathways for people to access it. And my passion has really been about how do we create content that's not disembodied from real life, that actually inspires people, that actually mirrors their personal and professional interests and goals.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel that as you go along, I mean, you've been doing this for 9 years now, are you refining the way that you deliver that story, that education, that whole, content package? Are you constantly refining and delivering it in different ways, do you think?
Yeah, definitely, because, back in 2005, podcasting was new and hot, right? And everyone was exploring how do we use podcast to to reach people, to get on their iPods and get into their lives. But over the years now, everyone is looking at mobile data. But I feel like some things are constant. And for language learning, the learners really just need a few things to succeed. They need the content itself, or what language teachers call learning input. So if you're learning Chinese or if you're learning English, that input might be a ChinesePod lesson. It might actually be a conversation with your coworker. It might be a piece of media resource you hear or read. And then you need to be able to make sense of it. You need to break it down. You need to study it, whether it's with a teacher or you're learning from a resource that helps you do it. And then you need to practice it. You need to be able to use it by speaking it with people in your life. And then you need someone to give you corrective feedback, whether it's a teacher, a friend, or a coworker. So I really believe these 4 elements are a core to the success of learning any languages. And no matter how the underlying technology changes, whether you deliver it through RSS feed, which God forbid, I still don't know how to configure properly most of the time. Or, you do it through an app or some other technology. The core pieces pretty much stay the same.
Right.
And I've always viewed technology as, underlying plumbing. As a learner myself, for example, I really don't want to be worrying about what technology I should use. I just want to be able to get access to that content and to be able to study it in a way that's the most convenient and accessible to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I want to explore that a bit more because I think there's a good segue there into OpenLanguage. But first, we were starting on your kind of story, and when you started with ChinesePod, you went down to Xintiandi and to the location there. You knocked on the door. It was probably a little less polished than you had expected. Can you kind of bring us up to? I know it's a lot of time to work with, but can you kind of run through kind of how that whole story went down? I mean, now you've done so many of these podcasts. You're totally comfortable in front of a microphone and talking about all these things, but. Was it always the case? When you started, was it a little bit of foreign territory for you?
Yeah, definitely. When I started working at ChinesePod, I had never had any teaching or radio experience. But I was very lucky in that my co-host, and in many ways my studio mentor, was a guy called Ken Carroll, who co-hosted almost 1,000 ChinesePod lessons with me. Ken was a very experienced English teacher in Shanghai, and he had a chain of very successful English learning schools called Kai'en.
Okay.
And he's just a brilliant communicator. He makes students feel like he's talking to you and just you. And he does it in such an incredibly engaging, humorous, but always relevant way. He never gets too carried away with the entertainment value and forget that we're here to teach language.
Right.
And not the other way around. So
Sure.
he has this perfect balance, and I think he's one of those people who really had it, born with them. They had the desire to be in front of a microphone and just share with people. So I learned, most of what I learned in the beginning, I learned from him. And when after many years and now that I have to hire and train new hosts, I feel, wow, if there is someone like that to coach through a new person, and then it makes the process so much easier
Sure.
and enjoyable for the new person. So I was lucky enough to be to be there with him.
And I have to ask you a question. So I'm sure he helped onboard you and kind of took you by the hand and eased your way into this thing that was totally foreign to you. What did you think about your voice the first time you heard it on, like, your recorded voice? Please tell me you didn't like it.
Cringed. It was like, oh my God.
I know, right? Why? And I've now, having done the podcast and speaking with other people kind of in loosely termed broadcasting space, they tell me it's natural. They tell me everybody hates the sound of their recorded voice. And
yeah.
It doesn't really sound the way it sounds in your head or when you hear it or something.
And I constantly, and still to this day, I'll go, oh, why did I say that? That's dumb. Yeah. Why did I pause there, But it's something, it's something, in my personal case, for maybe 2 or 3 months, I didn't even want to listen to my own recording. But then I realized if I didn't listen to it, I never would get better because I wouldn't be aware of how much I needed to improve. So I really needed to force myself to sit through listening to my own recordings. And then after a while, if you find you actually like listening to your own stuff, maybe for narcissistic reasons, but also for the purpose of, trying to get better, then I feel like you are designed for this role.
And do you listen to your own things now?
Yeah, I listen to it every day. When all of my recordings, I listen to every day. So
you finish a recording and then have a listen?
Yeah, because I really feel like that's an important way of helping you get better.
Yeah.
So I listen to my own work, and then I listen to, there are a bunch of other podcasts I really love.
Cool,
yeah.
Cool. Any pointers? I mean, what kind of things do you do? Things with your voice, the things you look out for, the way you pause?
Yeah, one big one for me is the energy level and the flow. I soon realized that if you carry the same kind of energy level outside the studio, in the studio, for some reason you just sound very lethargic. You just sound very tired. It almost like you need to put on your show hat and like have a bottle of Red Bull and say, no, I'm recording and I have a studio persona. You need to get your energy level up high.
Right.
And that's why initially when we did the podcasts, we would always stand and do it because when you stand, it sort of makes you more alert. And it helps you raise your energy level.
Right.
And if you feel you're kind of overdoing it, but when you actually listen to it back, it sounds natural.
Makes it more engaging good. And kind of makes people want to listen along.
Yeah,
right?
energetic and enthusiastic.
Yeah. Cool. So you started with ChinesePod, and things have been going, obviously very well since the time that you joined. What are some of the highlights over the past 9 years with ChinesePod that really stood out in your mind? Maybe there was an experience that you didn't expect to have, or really great successes here, or in your personal life with ChinesePod. Can you go through a couple of those?
One thing that's always my favorite story to tell was in 2007. So that's around 2 years after we started ChinesePod, I got an email. It's inviting me to be a guest speaker at a big learning conference in the United States.
Right.
But the person who wrote me the email said, my name is this, and I am the Chief Learning Officer for the CIA, and it's DCI, the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. And when I got this email, I still remembered I showed it to the founders of the company, and I said, oh, could this be scam or is it real? And they said, we don't know. Maybe you just write back and see. So I did, and it turned out the person who was inviting me was an avid ChinesePod user. And he really was the chief learning officer for the CIA. And then I went to Orlando, Florida for a big learning conference, Learning 2007. They have it every year. So this year it would be, Learning 2014.
Sure.
And I was invited to go up on the stage to introduce what we do with Chinese instruction and do this short bit of, we tried to teach the 3,000 live audience in the conference room a short phrase in Chinese. So the conference organizer asked me, what do you want to teach? And I said, they're American, so they must like cold beer. Let me do that. And kindly, they found some Qingdao beer there. So I taught the audience how to order a glass of cold Qingdao beer in Chinese.
Oh.
Yeah.
And did it go, so did they all repeat in unison after you taught them?
Yes.
Oh. And they did all right?
Yes, they did very well.
Oh.
So that was always a lovely story to me. And then I became very good personal friends with Jonathan, who invited me, the CIA guy, and also Elliot, who organized the conference. And it's a very respected learning figure in the United States.
Wow, that's a great experience. And I actually saw, I think I saw online that another speaker at the same conference was Colin Powell.
Oh, that was the same conference, but 2 years ago.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So Elliot kindly invited me back, and Colin Powell is the big marquee name speaker there.
Did you get a chance to meet him?
Yes. For 5 seconds.
Handshake.
had a photo taken with him.
Right.
But it's just one of those really surreal experiences.
Sure.
And there are so many experiences, maybe not as dramatic, but it's up to this day that the highlights have always been being able to meet people in person, and just seeing how we've helped them learn Chinese and enjoy the process a little bit more.
It's a cool thing with media in general, but obviously you mentioned in 2005 or 2006, podcasts were, just coming on the scene, and traditional media had begun to get a little bit shaken up, and it's fairly strongly ingrained, so it may not be going anywhere anytime soon. But at this stage, podcasts and other forms of media are widely available, and pretty much everyone can be their own content provider, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or a podcast, and at relatively low cost. So, but you engaged in it, and it's become such a popular thing, and your audience has been so big. I guess I'm asking, what's it like to be involved or at the helm of a media that has such broad reach like that? I mean, I know we've talked about the impact it can have when people let you know that you've really had an impact on their lives. But I mean, does it feel powerful in some way? Do you get because it's a form of media, and you have a really broad reach. So what's it like being kind of at the helm of that?
I think it just, on a very personal level, we record once a week at ChinesePod, and we'll do sort of 4 or 5 lessons for the following week.
Right.
And any given time, that recording day is the highlight of my week. It just makes me so fulfilled and happy being able to, have an audience and share with them the kind of Chinese as it's spoken today, now, and being able to help people put a human face to China, understand a little bit better what China is about. And I also feel like, maybe that aspect of having an audience is, it's so powerful,
right.
And it makes me feel very privileged, even though, like you said, it's user-generated content, and it's relatively a low barrier to entry to be your own content creator. I do feel in order to do something properly, it's a team effort.
Oh yeah, sure.
And to be able to do it consistently and have kind of a longevity, it's really not easy.
Sure.
So.
I mean, when I say that, I mean the media, the form of media is relatively low cost or low barrier to entry. But of course, putting it together in the way ChinesePod has, and all the work that goes into that, very difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we've been very, very lucky to have, had just very, very talented team members to on our team, and also, it all goes back to the listeners, the users, without whom this thing couldn't have lasted for so long. So yeah, I feel really, really lucky to have an audience, and in many ways, my family sort of background also comes in, because my dad, he ran a record publishing company. So I sort of grew up in a entertainment family.
Sure.
And sometimes he would talk about things at work, the deals they trying to sign with artists and stuff. And a lot of what he said was, oh, this person is hell to manage, this singer, this celebrity. And he would always say to me, when you're popular, sometimes these people get so bloated and they have such a big ego. And then once they don't have that audience, it's really hard for them to adjust.
Yeah.
And so he's always saying to me, having a stage and an audience, it's so transient. And if you have it, you should count yourself as very lucky, and you should work very, very hard to preserve it. And I think that has had such strong influence on my professional development. I just considered the whole thing to be such a privilege, and I work really hard and consciously to preserve it, because it's not easy.
Yeah, and you value it so much. Do you think, through this medium of a microphone and the audience listening in their headphones or on speakers or whatever, do you think, because anytime you want to maintain an audience, there's various components that go into it, right? The quality of your content has to be there for sure. It has to be engaging and somewhat entertaining. Do you think the audience can recognize your sincerity in your approach to these things? Rather than just being someone who, provides great content and makes it entertaining, do you think in whatever way, in the way that you deliver that, in your tone, in your energy, in your consistency, whatever it is, do you think the audience can, do you think you maintain an audience partially because they can sense that sincerity, they can hear it, they can whatever?
I hope so. And, being an avid podcast listener myself, two of my favorite podcasts are probably On Point with Tom Ashbrook. So it started as a radio show, but they distribute it through iTunes now, and it's affiliated with NPR. And he does it every day, and it's amazing because it's like a TV magazine show, like 60 minutes, but they don't do it once a week. They do it daily, and the topics range. It's usually topics that are current, that are what people are talking about and care about. And you just can feel that he really wants to be there.
Right.
No matter what the topic is, he is either personally very interested, invested in it, or he's learning so much about this new topic. And you just feel like he is so engaged in the conversation he's having with his guests. And another podcast I really love is, what's his name? It will come back to me, but it's a journalist who now I think has a tenured professorship with Brown University. And he does these sometimes very intensely intellectual conversations I don't really understand, but you just feel like he loves it so much.
It's interesting to be in the presence of someone like that.
And his passion motivates you. He transports you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I notice for the different podcasts that I listen to, and for me, sincerity is huge. Listening to the people that I listen to and knowing that there's not really much of an ulterior agenda, and even if there is, they're still like being genuinely themselves. This is how they're going to talk. because it's, the traditional media form of radio, which I grew up on and likely most people have in some way, it's there's so many doodads and sound bites and the host is always talking like this and coming up next. And it seems very kind of put together, very false. Whereas now that the media is accessible to more people, they're able to produce content that I think people are gravitating towards because of its sincerity. Whether or not it's a paid-for service or not, it's, people get to choose now. There's hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and people can choose which ones they want to go to. They don't have to tune into one of 3 radio stations in their city and listen to whatever they're putting out, the music, the commercials and stuff. And I think that's really a really interesting aspect of what's going on with all this new media, which I want to get your take on. But before we get going too much further, why don't you tell us a bit about OpenLanguage? Because I know that's a project that you're obviously working on now, really broadening the depth and the scope of what you guys are doing with ChinesePod. So can you tell me, kind of what's going on with OpenLanguage?
Sure. So ChinesePod became very successful in its field, and it's now one of the largest paid online Chinese learning services out there. And the company was acquired about 2 years ago by Bigfoot Ventures, which is an investment firm based in Hong Kong. And after selling ChinesePod, I've still I said to the acquirer that I really want to be able to contribute and be involved with it in the long run, because I helped build it, and I just identify so strongly with it, and I wish it all the very best.
Well, they must have loved to hear that.
Different ownership, and they, one of the reasons they bought ChinesePod was because they also loved what we did. They thought we did world-class Chinese lessons, and it has helped so many people with their learning, and that's a big reason they bought it. And they also, they have, they're also looking at ways that we can expand our audience. For example, we've always done things mostly in audio, but video is such a big component to media consumption, to learning today, but we haven't been able to really produce a lot of video lessons. So after the acquisition and now Bigfoot, they're investing heavily in this area. So while I am still very involved with ChinesePod, recording, I still do a lot of recordings. It also gave me an opportunity to do something else. But since I've been in the language learning industry for of my professional career, and that's the one thing I know and I really love. So I thought the same approach for ChinesePod of combining, I'd like to say it's in edutainment, engaging, entertaining educational content, creating that edutainment content for language learning, and deliver it in an accessible and convenient way to help busy people learn languages. That's what I really love doing. So that's how I started OpenLanguage. Because when we did ChinesePod, we also did a few other languages. So we had brands like SpanishPod, FrenchPod, and so on. So after ChinesePod was acquired, the other brands we got to keep. And then I thought, it had such great content, and it would be a shame if nobody maintained it. And so that's why the idea of OpenLanguage was born. We first seeded the platform with, the content from the old SpanishPod, EnglishPod, FrenchPod, and so on. And when we started 2 years ago, mobile apps, mobile just became so dominant, such a dominant technology. So, we don't even have RSS feed subscription. You just do everything through the mobile app. That's how learners get their content. So that's what we started with OpenLanguage. But we also were approached by just language teachers, schools that were inspired by what we did with ChinesePod and SpanishPod. And they said, I'd like to do something for this language. So we had partnerships with a school in Jordan who did an Arabic course on OpenLanguage. And we had a partnership with a team in Moscow, and they did a Russian product. And we recently helped someone in Ireland do an Irish course.
Right.
And so I just feel like...
And it's all in a similar, it's done in a similar way to ChinesePod? Yeah.
So what we do is, we provide some coaching with their curriculum design, with their, when they're putting together the team. I'd work with them and give them advice on the kind of, for example, hosts you want to have on your team, the kind of sort of the audio style and the format, and then help them produce their own language learning resources on OpenLanguage.
Now, all the languages on OpenLanguage, are they available to the Chinese market? Like, is your page translated, or are they...
So with OpenLanguage, we currently have 9... We currently teach 9 languages, including, English, Spanish, French. But we just launched Portuguese this month, which coincides with the World Cup. And it's a great project that we joined forces with UT Austin, University of Texas in Austin, and Professor Orlando Kilm, who's one of the most respected Portuguese professors in the U.S., spearheaded the project. So, with us in terms of market size, it splits between Chinese who are trying to learn English, and then other people who, other non-native English speakers who are trying to learn English but not from China. And then the other big segment for us are Americans, or the North American market, who's trying to learn another language, be it Spanish, French, Portuguese, and so on.
Cool.
Yeah.
So and OpenLanguage was founded when?
About 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
So on this show, we speak with a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people in the startup community. Do you consider yourself part of that community here in Shanghai now?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've been quite, not very, very involved, but quite involved in the local community here. And it's Shanghai has a really vibrant startup community now.
And it's growing.
Yeah.
It seems to be growing really quickly now. I mean, I had a friend of mine on last show, or 2 shows ago, and he is an organizer for a number of community events, like drinkabouts and stuff like that. And I knew him back in 2009 when I first moved here. And he was in advertising, nothing to do with tech or anything. I was in finance, nothing to do with startups. And, we met randomly at the China Accelerator Demo Day. And it's just funny how people are becoming drawn to this community. In whatever capacity, you have your entrepreneurs, you have your directors, you have people that want to be in the media side. But it seems like, especially in Shanghai, it's really starting to gather steam now. And
it's a very diverse community. You have expats living here, you have local Chinese, you have overseas returnee Chinese, and if you go to, I'm sure the demo day, the Accelerator Demo Day, or a Lean Startup event, here you see a really good mix of people represented here.
I want to get your take on something, because Shanghai, I know Beijing is like the traditional tech hub for China, at least till now, but Beijing is such an inconvenient city. It's so big and it's not that entertaining, and we all know about the air. But in Shanghai, there are certain issues that people don't necessarily like. But it's a convenient city. It's more cosmopolitan, like you said. It's much more international and multicultural, and it just seems like it's got all the right elements for a really vibrant startup community here. It's got cool, working spaces, and it's got just pretty much everything. But Tony and I were speaking about the difference between the foreign startup community and the Chinese domestic startup community. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, or actually, give me your insight on it. I mean, the foreign community just seems naturally more keen to come together and discuss ideas and to help each other out and stuff. But of course, the language and cultural barrier, for me to see the what's going on in the domestic scene, it kind of prohibits me from getting too deep into it. You represent a very interesting perspective. So, can you shed some light on that for us?
Well, I feel what you described with the foreign community, it's pretty much the Chinese side parallels that, but there isn't enough crossover insight into what each other is doing.
And why do you think that is?
I think language is a big issue. And, if you look at overseas returnees, Chinese, probably like myself, who've gone abroad to study and work, and kind of have the linguistic and cultural ability, then we sort of are involved maybe in a bigger capacity in both communities.
Right. Which is natural. I mean, because the elements are there to kind of have one foot in either one.
Yeah, and actually, I feel like there's a lot of interesting and exciting things happening on both sides.
Yeah.
But not, sort of crossed over.
Right. And do you think that's changing? Is it coming together a bit as this whole community really starts coming together in Shanghai? Or is it still kind of separate?
Well, my personal observation is it's still a little bit separate.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Because I think one of the reasons is a lot of the expat startup the entrepreneurs here, they're maybe designing products and services for the expat
and for Western
market
markets.
here, or for the Western markets,
Right.
and whereas the Chinese here, they are designing for a Chinese market, a domestic market.
That's a big consideration.
Yeah, they might be doing very similar things, but just very different markets.
And do you stay on top of the kind of tech news and the social media buzz and all that kind of stuff?
I'd like to, but between sort of two full-time roles and two relatively young sons, it's hard to find the time. But I do, on my Weixin 朋友圈, a lot of my friends are in the startup community. So just by looking at the updates or the stories they share, you get
a feel for what's
you
going
get
on.
very plugged in.
It's cool.
With what's going on here.
It's cool what's happening with Chinese social media and the kind of bigger internet companies now getting so much attention because of what they're doing, how big they've become, their listing in the U.S. I mean, and this has been building for a while, but what's your take on it? Because you started off in the tech scene here when it was very young, when a lot of the big companies that exist today and are dominating today, both nationally and even in some cases internationally, some of them weren't even around. So, you've seen the evolution and how things have changed, whether we're talking about, Weibo and WeChat and that sort of stuff, or Alibaba and Taobao, and just the whole, it's so fascinating, the e-commerce and the internet and tech industry in China in general, because to me it seems like the consumers went from not having, very much access to those sort of media and those sort of things to getting like all the access at once. So e-commerce and social media and all this kind of stuff. What's been your experience having lived through it all?
Well, I think this is one of... this just shows how quickly change takes place in China, right? Usually it's leapfrogging. You go past a few intermediary stages to go from, like my mom, she went from not knowing how to send an email to now she's buying everything online.
Yeah.
She skipped a few steps.
Right? Taobao is insanely popular. If anybody who wants something, you'd almost be foolish not to use it unless you wanted to do some window shopping. But anytime you want something here, you search it on Taobao and you can be reasonably guaranteed that it's going to arrive in maximum 2 days. But sometimes I'll order something at night and it'll arrive the next day in the morning.
Yeah.
It'll be cheaper. It'll be, quality's usually pretty good.
Yeah. So in my experience, it's... I remember in early 2000, you have a wave of Chinese companies and technology companies going to abroad and listed on the NASDAQ. And then, a few years ago, just so much revelations about fraud, unethical behaviors, wrong numbers, and really destroyed confidence in a lot of Chinese companies. And now we're seeing sort of the second wave of Chinese companies going abroad to get listed. But a lot of people say it's different this time. The tech infrastructure is so much better now. The market is so much bigger now, and it's not, a potential market. It's 400 million active internet users here with purchasing power.
And not only that, I mean, a huge market, but one, like you said before, where the market leapfrog steps. I mean, you don't, I feel like in the West, things just take longer to be instituted and like for people to become comfortable with them. But here, it's like WeChat or Weixin. They're like, okay, we're going to do financial products now or banking now. And the next month, there's $100 billion deposited, or the onboarding is so quick here. If Twitter decided, okay, we're going to move into banking, and so you can deposit money with us now. The growth, I presume, would be quite slow because their users don't see them in that light. It's not a banking institution; it's a social media channel. Whereas here, it just seems like something new comes up, and people are really eager to engage in it and try it.
I don't know if I could generalize it in this way, but I do feel like here people's appetite for trying new things seems to be, really enthusiastic about change.
It's ravenous, for sure.
About change. Even, you look at my parents' generation, right? And they are on their WeChat every day.
Yeah.
And you think it probably has something to do with how China just leapfrogged so many stages, and this has become like it's part of your being.
Right.
That's the pace of change here, and sort of people, it conditions you to be more willing to try new things or just accept that this is the new way of doing things.
Yeah. It's really amazing. So. Shifting it up a bit now, I know you've been very gracious with your time. I know you got to get back to your work. So I usually ask a few questions to guests before they go, just to try to get them to give some advice to the people that might be listening out there. But one of the things I wanted to ask you first, it's a bit of an odd question, but I think given your position and your experience, you might have some insight on. What are a few mistakes that foreign entrepreneurs in China do often in your mind? Like what are things when you see them you might kind of cringe, or you might think that it's kind of ill-fated? Have you come across those things where you witness things that you're like, oh man, I wish you shouldn't be doing that, or just kind of mistakes that you think you could be avoided?
I'm not sure if it's a mistake or but one thing I do see a lot is even asking the question, should I have a Chinese partner, a strong co-founder?
Right.
Because if you are targeting the Chinese market, then I think you do need a strong partner.
Right.
Someone you can trust, because there are just so many different layers and things to starting a business here. Everything from the legal side of registering a business to how do you pay Chinese employees, to renting office space, to small things like getting internet. If you are not very fluent in the language, and if you haven't been here for a few years and kind of have navigated your way through it, definitely. And then it's not easy to find a partner, right?
Yeah.
But definitely get plugged in with the local startup community, or try to get a co-working space that's very Chinese and be able to help you with a lot of these things.
Okay.
And another thing I'm noticing less now, but definitely a few years ago, it would be foreign entrepreneurs who who want to sort of take an American startup idea and try it here. And I feel like a few years ago, maybe that had a little bit higher chance of success because the startup community here was more sort of not as plugged in with what's happening in the Silicon Valley as they are now.
Right.
So as a foreigner, you still have the chance of, some of the earliest 团购, Groupon-like sites in China were started by foreigners, but then, quickly Chinese people sort of copied the idea as well.
It really seems if you're going to be a foreign tech entrepreneur in China, you got to be pretty damn good because there's so many domestic, Chinese that are in this market and that are trying to innovate and do new things and do them well, and they understand the culture and the language and all those things so much better than you do. You really have to have your stuff together, right, to compete in that market.
Yeah, so I would probably say just overestimate the amount of difficulty and obstacle because I have talked to many people, foreigners in China, and they say, well, it's amazing just the entrepreneurial energy it is out here.
Is.
And, I've heard people say it just seems like it's so
in their
low
blood.
risk. Yeah, it makes you feel it's so low risk to start a business here. In some way, I guess it's true, right? When everyone or a lot of people are doing it, it sort of makes you feel, hey, what the heck? Let me try as well.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also feel because of that, it's so competitive,
right.
and there are just so many things that you're not familiar with. So overestimate the amount of problems you're going to run into.
Our very first guest, Alex Duncan from KWO, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but that was his advice. He said, his boss always used to tell him, whatever you think you need to do to get whatever job done, do twice as amount, 2 times the amount of that. Work twice as hard, work twice as long, do twice the amount of work because that's probably what it's going to realistically take to get it done.
And double check everything.
Yeah. What about, last question before I let you go, Jenny, what about your Chinese counterpart, a local Chinese person who's interested in tech and startups and making a difference and getting involved in an entrepreneurial capacity somehow? What kind of advice would you give them? They're just starting out. You have both perspectives and you've got a lot of experience and have been very successful. So what would you say to them?
Well, with the Chinese side, I've seen friends who, because there's so much money in China to invest in things. So sometimes I feel like maybe it's true in the States in some ways, their whole objective, even before starting a business, is get an exit strategy.
Right.
And I'm not sure. I know in my personal experience, if I had seen things that way, I probably...
Your approach would have been very different.
Yeah,
exactly. You may not have been successful, right?
And so I think to do something you truly care about is so important. If you have to, because an entrepreneurial life it's a different lifestyle.
Right.
Your work is such a big part of you. You're going to pour your heart, sweat, and tears into it.
Right.
And if your motivation is to get a payday, an exit strategy before you even started at anything, you probably that's not going to pull you through.
Right. It's like it almost seems like that's not a strong enough motivation to keep you going through the low points and wake up early or whatever it is.
And also 90% of startups sadly fail. Right. And the ones that you do see.
Is that it? Only 90%? I would have thought it was higher.
Maybe it is higher. But we only hear, the ones that do make it, right? Sure. And it makes you feel like, there is a payday.
We talked about this before on the podcast, but if you keep up with the tech media, right? Every week you're hearing about new financing rounds and so-and-so got acquired by so-and-so. And you think like, oh, wow, I really want to get into that. They got $50 million for their Series A, or they got, 2 billion for Oculus Rift, all this kind of stuff. But like you said, you don't hear those stories where people fought long and hard for a long time and unfortunately didn't work out. But what's so great about the community is that even in those cases, people are willing to support each other to get back up on the horse, give it another try, whatever their industry is. Connect with some new people that maybe is a better team or whatever it is. It's really, and again, we talked about this before, but it's really one of those communities that fosters attempts and doesn't look upon failure as being a totally negative thing. It's kind of like a part of the process.
Yes, and thank you for being a very big part of that. Thank you for this wonderful podcast.
We're just getting going here, but that's certainly the intent of the show. Bring great people and experienced people like yourself on and have a chat and see what your experiences were like and see if the people that are out there listening can't gain from some of the mistakes, but also some of the motivations that have guided you.
Sure.
So on that, Jenny, I think we'll end the show. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people get a hold of either you or OpenLanguage or ChinesePod if they want to connect with you guys?
If you're interested in learning Chinese, ChinesePod is the best place to go, I promise you.
I'll back that up.
ChinesePod.com. And then if you're interested in learning other languages, English, Spanish, a whole list of them, OpenLanguage.com. And I blog at JennyZhu.com. And I also do a weekly free podcast that talks about what's current and what Chinese people are talking about. It's called Important Chinese Things with Jenny Zhu.
I was listening to a couple earlier. They're really interesting. So definitely check those out. And what about Chinese social media? Do you have for our Chinese, our followers that have those social media accounts?
Sure.
Do you have those?
So Weibo, I have to admit, after Weixin, I haven't updated my Weibo in 6 months.
So many people are like that.
Yeah, but I'm active on Weixin. Yeah, just find me at Jenny Zhu. So JennyZhuqi.
Awesome. And everybody, you can find us on iTunes, Tech in Shanghai, or on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai. We haven't tackled the Chinese social media thing yet, but we will get on that.
Step by step.
Yeah, exactly. Step by step. And our website's going to be coming down probably next week sometime.
Yeah. If you like the show, don't forget to leave comments and tell other people about it because that's how
we get the community together and get everything growing. Jenny, thank you very much for coming on today, and everyone, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai for everything tech from Shanghai and China. See you next time.